Ya.
Con Luigi Giorgi, director ejecutivo de los productos de neurología de EISAI en Europa, aprovechando precisamente el simposio de EISAI en Bruselas dentro del Congreso Europeo. Tema de epilepsia. La primera pregunta es los avances que existen hoy en día para investigación para el tema de epilepsia pueden significar que en un momento determinado se desaparezca esta enfermedad.
Have recent breakthroughs, pharmaceutical breakthroughs, I'm thinking, will they mean the end of epilepsy, so to speak, the control of the disease at least? I mean, are we expecting any big thing happening in the field?
Well, the data that we are presenting at this conference will support the use of zonisamide in pediatric patients. We have therefore developed a clinical development program aimed to specifically study in pediatric patients the effect of zonisamide. And in these studies we are actually demonstrating that the effect of zonisamide compared to placebo is that zonisamide is in fact a very efficacious drug in controlling partial seizures compared to people that are treated with placebo in adjunctive settings.
Otra pregunta.
Okay, my question. This is going to be a cold, very company kind of question, but I noticed that half the drugs that EISAI has for neurology are epilepsy drugs. I was thinking, and maybe this is my ignorance, that there wasn't such a big patient population. It seems like it is, and it's a bigger population than diabetics if we consider children. And, I mean, what's the story there? How did this start? Because Alzheimer's drugs having a really wide goal in the population are really hard to get, and some companies have even been shaken when their drugs didn't turn out to be as successful as they were expected to. So I'm withdrawing in my mind the Alzheimer thing and focusing on epilepsy. What's the story about this? I mean, I think
this is a very good question, but we mustn't forget one very important data from the epidemiological data specifically in epilepsy. We know that even with all the drugs that we have available, and this is not just the EISAI drugs, but the overall drugs that we have available for prescription, there is a category of patients that still experience seizures, despite of the fact that the patients have tried new medication. And in fact, this is a percentage of patients of nearly 30%. So there is a pool of 30% of patients from the overall population of epileptic patients who are still continuing to experience seizures despite medication. And therefore there is always a need for additional new medications that can provide additional benefit to patients. Now, the example of Fycompa, perampanel, which is our recently approved drug for the treatment of partial onset seizures, I think is a very good example of exactly what we've been talking now, because Fycompa provides a new mechanism of action that no other drugs provides, and therefore provides the opportunity for physicians to treat the epileptic conditions from a different angle. And the drug acts specifically on one receptor subtype, the AMPA receptor subtype of the brain, and no other drugs are able to do that. And we're hoping that with this different mechanism of actions, patients who were not previously able to respond to medications can respond to medication, at least some of them, with the use of Fycompa. So I think there are benefits for looking at more and more and additional drugs, because the problem is still there in terms of refractory epilepsy.
I see. My next question actually is related to that. And now I forgot it. No, I have it here in my mind someplace. I have this notion, I don't know if I'm right or not, that the more drugs, the more antiepileptic drugs that one given patient receives, the harder it is to control the disease. When a completely new mechanism of action comes into the scenario, Does this change or not?
Yes.
It does.
I think it's a very good question, also the point that you raised. You're absolutely right. When you start to see patients that do not respond to the first treatment, the likelihood that they respond to the second treatment is reduced. And the likelihood that they respond to a third treatment added on to the other two is even less. So you're absolutely right. That is completely an important issue. But also we talked today about rational polytherapy. Rational polytherapy also indicates that there are patients who maybe should be treated with drugs that act utilizing different mechanisms of actions. And because this is such an heterogeneous condition, not a single patient will respond to the same drug like another patient. So I'm afraid that it's going to be a little bit of a trial and error, and we talk about a trial and error, to trying to find what is the best drug that is effectively treating at best the seizures of a particular patient. And there could be patients out there that they respond particularly well to the old and established antiepileptic drugs. But generally, we know that 30% of these patients, they would not respond to these old drugs. And we need to find which one out of the new drugs, these drugs that provide new mechanism of actions, can reduce the number of seizures that these patients have. But also, the final point that I want to make is that I do not believe that simply adding on top medication is necessarily the right thing to do. At one point, it's also important to understand what is the drug that is providing the benefit for the patients. And that also takes a lot of time. Like, for example, if one drug is added on top of another one, and this drug and you start to see some benefits when you introduce this drug, I think it may be worthwhile at some point to try to understand what happened, rather than keeping the two medications together, what happened if I reduce or even take away the original drug? Because the overall goal is also to minimize the pill burden for patients.
So monotherapy would be the best model for future clinical essays?
For some patients, yes. For some patients, no.
I see.
Because we're dealing, as I said, with a very heterogeneous condition. We're not dealing just with partial onset seizures, we're dealing with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and we talk about Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. With that kind of patients, we're talking of patients who have so many severe seizures during the day, sometimes even hundreds of seizures during the day. And I need
catastrophic.
To catastrophic.
It's called catastrophic epilepsy,
yeah,
right?
It's a disaster in terms of the impact on their daily life, and therefore you have to be, tailor your goal to the specific need of the patients. So thinking, well, that patient can be controlling monotherapy, probably not. And you need to be realistic about that.
Where's the competition doing? Does anybody out there have another non-competitive AMPA receptor agonist? I know there was one Talampanel or something, I don't remember the name. It wasn't efficient. But besides yours, is there any other company that has that in their pipeline? I mean, this is public, you should know, better than me. Is there any competition? I
don't want particularly to talk about the competition. It's not up to me to talk about the competition.
No, I understand. There's some data that I found confusing. Maybe this is me again getting distracted or something. But the Russian expert talking at the meeting just now, she said that between 1999 and last year, there hadn't been any approvals. Yes. And then we saw your slides, and we had Sevinix, and then we had Perampanel, and everything. It was like 2005, 2006. She didn't know about this, or what happened?
No. Let me clarify that.
Okay.
2005 for Zonegran was approval for adult treatment. She was only referring on pediatrics.
I understand.
2007 for Inovelon. You're absolutely right. Inovelon, Lennox-Gastaut, that should have been included in the slide.
Yeah, that's
because that's pediatric.
Okay.
Zebinix 2009, that was only for adults.
Okay, I understand now.
So
Half and
she
half.
only missed the 2000
Okay.
but you must
Let us get
forget it's a niche market, orphan drug status, very small.
I understand.
Very
Now,
small.
I see
So
it now.
she wasn't totally 100% correct, but she was 99%.
No, but
correct.
no, talking about children,
Yeah.
focusing on
Yeah.
children's population, I
Yeah.
understand now. That's all I have.
In the portfolio of EISAI, the imminent trial or epilepsy?
Yeah, we are certainly we are conducting additional studies with FICOMPA. FICOMPA is we're going through line extensions program with the certainly the issues around investigating the effect of FICOMPA in primary generalized seizures, including primary generalized tonic-clonic seizures. We're also investigating the effect of FICOMPA in pediatric patients, including very young or infantile patients. So the aim for FICOMPA will be to expand on different seizure types and also to expand and provide the drug available for pediatric patients as well as infantile patients in the long run. So this is what we're doing right now in terms of development of our drugs.
I have one last question that I just remember. Can I?
Yeah.
Neuroprotection. You mentioned it, but you didn't go like really into it. And since we're talking about patients, we have the adverse effects of the disease itself, and then the adverse cognitive effects of the medication, and they are taking, an amount of drugs. I understand Sanisamed has shown some neuroprotective effects.
The neuroprotective effects, you're right, especially with the data associated with perampanel, FICOMPA. We do have some data on neuroprotective effect, but obviously that will require a very specific clinical development program that is aimed to show the neuroprotection, and that is a complicated path. To be perfectly honest, at the moment we're focusing on the areas that I just mentioned with FICOMPA.
But will you be willing to find that out?
We're willing to find out anything that it potentially leads to an indication and an approval, but you have to understand that this pathway is not even clearly marked yet, even with regulatory agencies. So this will require a long time of discussion and agreement with regulatory agencies even before you can do the studies.
So I shouldn't say anything because I could be getting ahead of myself or what? I would like to say it, but I'm not allowed, am I? No, not allowed.
No,
It wouldn't be true, and one wants to.
No,
be
we're
true.
not. We're not in our positions at this point. It's not. Let's put it like that. You're correct. There is the data that we have, but it's not in the first line of piece of work that we're
Understood.
doing. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Luigi Giorgi, que se continúe avanzando e investigando sobre epilepsia. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you so